A big snow fell February 25th, 1934, the day Bessie Scott and Herbert Vandivort were to be married. Bessie waited for her intended husband to show up at her house, but he never came. Because her papa George Scott loved his daughter so much, he hitched up the wagon and drove Bessie through the deep snow to the Vandivort home so she could talk with Herbert. Bessie and Herbert talked in the kitchen for a while, and then Papa took her home in the wagon, with her future life with Herbert very uncertain. 3 days later, Bessie was doing some sewing and moaning around the house when she heard a knock at the door. She opened the door, and there stood Herbert Vandivort. He asked her if she wanted to get married that afternoon. She said yes, put on her blue wedding dress that her little sister Leah May had accidentally cut a hole in, and the wedding was back on. They made their home in the Brushy Knob community for the first 2 years. During this time, Herbert announced his call to preach and was ordained on September 27, 1935, at the Union Chapel Church. They welcomed their first baby, John Mark, on July 3, 1935. Shortly after Mark was born, Herbert bought a 1929 Ford rumble seat coupe automobile. Prior to getting the car, Herbert had been using Shanks mares, which meant walking or riding a mule, to travel the 15 miles to preach at Union Chapel Church. When Mark was 20 months old, his parents bought 60 acres of uncultivated land on Possum Creek, 9 miles west of Houston, Missouri. They paid $500 cash and borrowed the other $500 at 8% interest. The farm was badly in need of repair and nurturing. They didn't have electricity, running water, or a telephone. Those modern conveniences would not come to this farm for another 15 years. Bessie was recuperating from surgery, requiring a long recovery when they moved. When they arrived at the old rundown house on their new land, they were greeted with a big groundhog mound of dirt all piled up in the middle of the front room. The groundhogs were under the house. Bessie cried and cried. Mark made many happy memories growing up on the farm. He enjoyed farm work the most when he and his dad could work together. His daddy would say, "Make work fun." Herbert taught Mark to cross Possum Creek on stilts. As he carried an axe and other tools to do the work, Herbert would cross ahead of his son to show him the way. The Vandivort family worked hard building their farm. In 1942, a second son, Daniel, was added to the family. 3 years later, a third son, Benjamin, would complete their little family. In 1942, Herbert built a Grade A dairy barn, which passed all state inspections. They milked it for 33 years. After World War II, Herbert retired the old team of mules and purchased a John Deere LA tractor. This revolutionized their farming. The tractor was equipped with lights, and Mark's goal during busy season was to operate it until midnight. Mark, Dan, and Ben learned to work together as brothers. The fields were full of hay bales. While their daddy and mother milked the cows, Ben or Dan would slowly drive the small Ford 8N tractor while the other brothers helped place the bales on the wagon after Mark tossed them up. The Vandivorts were always big hunters, and they looked forward to their city relatives driving up the lane to go fishing in Possum Creek, or to hunt deer, turkey, rabbits, or anything that looked tasty to eat, a tradition that continues to this day. After living for 10 years in the impossible house, the one Bessie at first had thought she could not survive even a night, Bessie and Herbert had Burl Halliburton and Elsie Edwards help them build a small, modest, 4-room house with a bath, basement, and a big attic room upstairs. This house became their home for the remainder of their lives. By the time Mark graduated from high school, his younger brothers, Ben and Dan, were helping with a significant load of the farm work. Mark went on to study at Missouri College of Agriculture in May 1959. That same year, Mark rode to the Free Will Baptist Convention in Asheville, North Carolina with his Uncle Rolla, Aunt Agnes, and cousins Linda and Beth. He was introduced to Louise Underwood by his Uncle Ben Scott. Cousin Dwayne Scott loaned Mark his Volkswagen Bug to take Louise out to dinner. They got married December 26, 1959, and are still enjoying life together 57 years later. Mark had invited Jesus to come into his heart at age 9 during a morning service at the Oak Grove Schoolhouse, now Oak Grove Free Will Baptist Church. Later, his daddy baptized Mark in Hamilton Creek. Many years later, when Mark was in college, Mark felt God dealing with him to surrender his life to preach the gospel. God brought Mark to the point where he wanted to preach more than anything else. During his 40-plus years of ministry, preaching God's word has been Mark's highest priority. Louise has been a faithful wife, mother, co-laborer in ministry with Mark throughout their almost 58 years of marriage. Her training as a school teacher has been used in church ministry as well as in training their own children. Mark and Louise have 5 children and 14 grandchildren.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
In the year 2000, Mark and Louise retired to Noble, Oklahoma to be near their daughters, Bethany and Deborah, and their families. They are actively involved at Cross Point Church, Norman, Oklahoma, where Mark is co-teacher of an adult Sunday school class. Mark had an acute stroke on December 18, 2016. After months of physical therapy, he is now able to walk again using a cane. Even now, Mark enjoys telling others about the wondrous love of Jesus. John Mark Vandivort, friend, father, husband, pastor, counselor, man of integrity, teacher, disciple, home missionary, student, colleague, caring, compassionate, lover of people, lover of God, devoted, man of God. Such are the qualities of Mark Vandivort. From the farmland of Missouri to the challenges of international ministry, John Mark Vandivort, faithfully serving the Lord with all his heart, soul, strength, spirit, and mind. We rise up now and call Mark blessed.